She looked down, guilt written all over her face. While you were in Tokyo, I borrowed money from him. A lot of money. I told him it was for the house, for bills, but the truth is I was using it to fund my lifestyle. The trips, the shopping, everything. You still here? Stunt. You borrowed money from the guy you were cheating on me with? I've just gotten back to the States after nearly 4 years of working abroad in Tokyo. My company had been expanding, and they dangled a promotion in front of me that felt impossible to turn down. Emily, my wife of 8 years, had been hesitant about the move. 4 years is a long time to be apart, she'd said back then, her voice wavering. But I'd reassured her, promised her that we'd make it work. You'll visit every few months, I'd said. We'll FaceTime every night. We'll get through this. At first we had, but life has a way of creeping in. The time zones made calls harder. The flights got fewer and farther between. I buried myself in work, convinced I was doing it for us, for our future. And Emily, well, I thought she understood. When I walked into our house that night, suitcase in hand, I felt like I was stepping into a stranger's home. Emily hadn't come to pick me up from the airport, claiming she had errands to run. The fridge was nearly empty. The lights dim. It didn't feel like the home I'd been dreaming of returning to. Later that evening, while Emily was out finishing errands, I noticed her laptop open on the kitchen counter. A notification popped up, an email. Normally, I wouldn't have looked, but the subject line caught my eye. Last weekend was perfect. I miss you already. The email was from someone named Landon. Short and sweet, but the words hit me like a freight train. Emily, I don't know how I got so lucky to find you. These past few years have been the best of my life. I hate that we have to sneak around, but I'll take whatever I can get. Can't wait to see you again. Love, L. Years. Years. I stood there, my hands gripping the counter, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. This wasn't some one-off fling. This was a relationship, a life she'd built without me. I scrolled through more emails, each one worse than the last. There wasn't just one man. There were two. Landon, who seemed to be the romantic one. And then there was Tyler, whose messages were a lot less poetic. Can't stop thinking about you. That dress last night. Jesus, Emily. You're driving me insane. When's your husband back? I'll come by after. When Emily got home later that night, she acted like nothing was wrong. She kissed me on the cheek, asked me how the flight was, and started unloading groceries. I watched her, my hands clenched into fists, the anger simmering just below the surface. Who's Landon? I asked, cutting through her cheerful chatter. She froze, a carton of eggs halfway to the fridge. Slowly, she turned to face me, her expression carefully blank. What? You heard me, I said, my voice steady but cold. Who's Landon? And while we're at it, who's Tyler? Her face drained of color. Jake, I don't lie to me, Emily, I snapped, stepping closer. I've seen the emails. I know everything. She stared at me, her eyes wide, and for a moment I thought she might deny it. But then she did something I wasn't expecting. She laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh either. It was bitter, sharp, and full of something that sounded a hell of a lot like resentment. What do you want me to say, Jake? She said, setting the eggs on the counter. That I'm sorry? That I regret it? Because I don't. You still te hier stond. You don't regret it? No, she said, her voice firm. Do you have any idea how lonely I've been these past 4 years? Do you even care? I was working, I said, my anger boiling over. I was building a life for us, our future. Our future? She shot back. You were gone, Jake. For 4 years. Do you know what it's like to wake up every day and not have your husband there? To go to sleep every night in an empty bed? I tried to make it work, but you weren't here. So you found someone else? I shouted. No, wait. To someone else's? Jesus, Emily. You didn't just cheat. You built a whole other life. Her eyes flashed with anger. And what was I supposed to do? Just sit around and wait for you? Pretend everything was fine while you were halfway across the world, working late nights and missing calls? You left me, Jake. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. You were gone long before I found them. Her words hit me like a slap. I wanted to yell, to scream, to throw something, but instead, I just stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How long has this been going on? Landon. 2 years, she admitted, not meeting my eyes. Tyler, a little over a year. I laughed bitterly. So what? While I was over in Tokyo, you were here playing house with them? It's not like that, she said quickly. I didn't plan for this to happen. I didn't mean to hurt you. Didn't mean to hurt me? I said, my voice rising again. Emily, you lied to me for years. You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed us. And then she said the words that broke me. I fell in love with Landon. The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself, my mind reeling. You fell in love with him? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean to, Jake. I didn't want this to happen, but he was there. He listened. He made me feel alive. And Tyler? I asked, my voice dripping with venom. Did you fall in love with him too? No, she said quickly. Tyler was different. It wasn't serious. It was just physical. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow and broken. So, let me get this straight. While I was working my ass off for us, you were here falling in love with one guy and screwing another. And now what? You expect me to just what? Forgive you? I don't know what I expect, she said, her voice trembling. But I couldn't keep lying to you. Not anymore. You didn't confess, Emily, I said coldly. You got caught. I left the house that night. I had to. Staying in the same space as Emily after everything she'd admitted, it was too much. I drove aimlessly for hours, the weight of her words crushing me. I fell in love with Landon. The phrase echoed in my mind, taunting me like a cruel joke. Around midnight, I checked into a motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it gave me the space I needed to breathe, or at least try to. I barely slept. My chest felt tight, and there was this strange pressure building behind my ribs, like my body was trying to scream at me to stop, to rest. But I ignored it, just like I'd ignored every other warning sign for the past 4 years. When I took the job in Tokyo, it felt like the opportunity of a lifetime. My boss had called me into his office, telling me that they needed someone to spearhead the expansion overseas, someone with the drive and discipline to pull it off. The pay was astronomical, the promotion guaranteed, and I was hungry for success. But the job came with a cost, a grueling schedule, constant deadlines, and no room for error. I was working 16-hour days, 6, sometimes 7 days a week. Sleep became a luxury. Meals were whatever I could grab between meetings, and exercise was out of the question. I told myself it was temporary, that once the project was finished, I'd come back to Emily, and everything would be worth it. But the truth was, I barely noticed how much I was breaking myself in the process. I was always tired, always irritable, but I powered through. That's what I was supposed to do, right? Provide, sacrifice, win. And now, it had all been for nothing. Emily didn't just betray me. She erased every reason I'd told myself this was worth it. 2 days after I left, I started to feel worse. The tightness in my chest turned into sharp pains, and every time I stood up, my head spun. I chalked it up to stress, the lack of sleep, the emotional roller coaster of Emily's betrayal. By the 3rd day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. When I stood up to get water, my legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the floor. That's when I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. When I got to the ER, the doctors moved quickly. Too quickly. 1 minute, I was explaining my symptoms to a nurse, and the next, I was being wheeled into a private room, hooked up to machines that beeped and whirred in a terrifying rhythm. What's going on? I asked, my voice weak. A doctor appeared at my bedside, his expression grave. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, he said, and your heart rate is irregular. We're running some tests, but I need to know, how long have you been feeling like this? Feeling like what? I asked, confused, tired. Weak. Any chest pain? Dizziness? I hesitated, realizing I'd been brushing off those symptoms for years. I don't know. Maybe a while. His brow furrowed. Jake, you're showing signs of severe hypertension. Based on your tests, this didn't happen overnight. It's likely been building for years. Years. My mind reeled. Had I done this to myself? Had the constant grind, the sleepless nights, the never-ending stress finally caught up with me? We're admitting you, the doctor continued. You need to rest, and we need to figure out exactly what's going on. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital, hooked up to monitors while the doctors poked and prodded. Emily didn't call. Not once. I didn't even expect her to. But on the third day, as I was lying there staring at the ceiling, the door opened and she walked in. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice flat. She hesitated, holding a bouquet of flowers like some peace offering. "I heard you were in the hospital. I wanted to check on you." I scoffed. "Really? You suddenly care now?" Her face fell, but I didn't care. She had no right to be here, not after what she'd done. "Jake," she said softly, stepping closer. "I know I hurt you. I know I messed up, but I still care about you." "You don't get to say that," I snapped. "You don't get to cheat on me for years, build a life with someone else, and then act like you're the victim." She flinched, but didn't move. "I'm sorry," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I shook my head, my anger bubbling over. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Emily. Do you even realize what you've done? I gave up everything for us, for you, and you threw it all away." "I didn't know how to handle it," she said, her voice breaking. "You were gone for so long, Jake. And when you were here, it was like you weren't really here. I felt invisible. Then why didn't you say something?" I shouted. "Why didn't you tell me how you felt instead of running to Landon or Tyler, or whoever else was convenient?" She didn't answer, just stood there with tears streaming down her face. For a moment, I thought she might actually walk away. But instead, she surprised me. "You need help, Jake," she said softly. "You've been killing yourself for years, and you don't even see it." Her words hit me harder than I expected. As much as I hated to admit it, she was right. The work, the stress, the constant push to be better, it had consumed me. And now it was killing me. Emily left after that, and I was grateful. I needed space. Time to think. The doctors adjusted my medication, and I started to feel better physically, but emotionally, I was a wreck. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but now it was mixed with something else. Regret. Not for what Emily had done that was on her, but for how much I'd let my life spiral out of control. For years, I'd told myself I was doing this for us, for our future. But the truth was, I'd been running. From what? I wasn't sure. Maybe from failure. Maybe from the fear of being ordinary. Whatever it was, it had cost me everything. The chest pain came back 2 weeks after I left the hospital. At first, it was just a dull ache, something I could ignore if I stayed still long enough. But it didn't stay that way. By the time it hit full force, I was in my car, stuck in traffic, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't make it home. Somehow, I managed to pull into a gas station before my body gave out. The last thing I remember is the world spinning, my chest feeling like it was being crushed by a truck, and the sound of someone shouting, "Call 911." When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, tubes and wires everywhere. Machines beeped in an uneven rhythm, and the fluorescent lights above made my head throb. A nurse noticed me stirring and called for the doctor. "Mr. Carter," the doctor said, appearing at my bedside. He was a stocky man with tired eyes, the kind of guy who'd seen more broken bodies than he cared to remember. "You had a heart attack." "A heart attack?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm only 39. Heart attacks don't care about age," he said bluntly. "Your body's been under constant stress for years. The hypertension, the lack of sleep, the poor diet, it's all catching up to you." I closed my eyes, the words hitting me like a punch. I thought back to the late nights in Tokyo, the skipped meals, the coffee-fueled marathons where I convinced myself I was invincible. I'd been so focused on success, on being enough, that I hadn't realized I was slowly killing myself. The doctor continued, his tone firm, but not unkind. "You're lucky to be alive, but this isn't something you can bounce back from overnight. You're going to need time, real time, to heal. And I mean that physically and mentally." Later that day, while I was drifting in and out of sleep, I heard a familiar voice. "Is he awake?" Emily's voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Not yet," the nurse replied, "but you can sit with him." I wanted to tell them to stop her, to send her away, but I didn't have the strength. A few minutes later, I felt her presence next to me, the warmth of her hand brushing against mine. "Jake," she whispered, "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm sorry for everything." My eyes fluttered open, and I turned my head to look at her. She looked terrible, her hair disheveled, dark circles under her eyes. For a split second, I almost believed she cared. But then I remembered the texts, the lies, the other men. What are you doing here, Emily? I rasped. Tears filled her eyes. I heard what happened. I couldn't stay away. Why? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. So you can watch the fallout of everything you helped cause? She flinched but didn't leave. I know I hurt you, Jake, but I still care about you. Don't, I said, my voice breaking. Don't pretend like you care. Not now. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Jake, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but you have to let me help you. I stared at her, the anger bubbling up again. Help me? You've done enough, Emily. Go back to Landon or Tyler or whoever the hell you're with now. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might actually leave. But instead, she surprised me. I'm not with either of them, she said, her voice trembling. It's over. All of it. Good for you, I said bitterly. But that doesn't change what you did. I know, she said, tears streaming down her face. But I can't lose you, Jake. Not like this. The next few days were a blur of tests, medications, and long, lonely nights in the ICU. The doctors told me my recovery would be slow, that my heart had sustained damage that couldn't be undone. This isn't just about your heart, one of them said during his rounds. Your whole body has been in survival mode for years. It's going to take time for things to stabilize, and you need to address the stressors in your life, or this will happen again. The stressors, Emily, my job. The pressure I'd put on myself to be everything to everyone. I thought I could handle it all. I thought I was strong enough. But the truth was, I'd been running myself into the ground, and now I was paying the price. On the fourth night in the ICU, I woke up to the sound of voices outside my room. Emily was arguing with someone, her voice low but urgent. You can't just show up here, she hissed. I needed to see him, a man replied. His voice was deep, familiar. Landon. My heart rate spiked, the monitor beside me beeping wildly. The nurse rushed in, adjusting the 4 and trying to calm me down, but I couldn't stop the surge of adrenaline. Get them out of here, I managed to say, my voice weak but firm. Now. The nurse nodded and stepped into the hallway. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and Emily walked in alone. Jake, what the hell is he doing here? I demanded, cutting her off. She hesitated, her face pale. Because he wanted to check on you. I let out a bitter laugh. Check on me? Are you kidding me? After everything you two did, you thought it'd be a good idea to bring him here? I didn't bring him, she said quickly. He showed up on his own. I stared at her, the rage simmering beneath the surface. Get out, Emily. Both of you. I don't want to see either of you again. She opened her mouth to respond, but I turned away, refusing to look at her. A few seconds later, I heard the door close, and I was alone again. The next morning, the doctor came in with more test results. His face was grim, but I was too numb to feel much of anything. The previous night's debacle with Emily and Landon had drained me, and I was running on fumes, both physically and emotionally. Mr. Carter, he began, his tone serious. We've been monitoring your condition closely, and I need to be honest with you. You're in critical territory. Your heart is weak, and the damage from prolonged stress and untreated hypertension has left you at high risk for another event. If we don't make significant changes now, you may not survive the next one. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I nodded slowly, my throat too tight to speak. It's not too late to turn things around, he continued, but it's going to take commitment. You need to prioritize your health, both physical and emotional. That means eliminating stressors. All of them. I knew exactly what he meant. Later that afternoon, Emily came back. I didn't want to see her, but a part of me needed answers, needed to understand why she'd done what she did. She sat down next to my bed, her expression unreadable. I know you don't want to see me, she said quietly, but I need to tell you the truth. I crossed my arms, glaring at her. The truth? Now, after all the lies, she flinched but didn't back down. Yes, because you deserve to know everything. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. When you left for Tokyo, I tried to be supportive. I really did, but it felt like you chose your job over me, over us. I was doing it for us, I said, my voice low but firm. For our future. I know, she said, tears filling her eyes. But you don't understand how lonely I was. You were gone for months at a time, And when you did come home, it felt like your mind was still somewhere else. I needed connection, Jake. I needed someone who saw me. And that's when you found Landon, I said bitterly. She nodded. Yes. He was attentive. He listened. He made me feel important again. But it wasn't just him. Tyler was there too, and I know how that makes me look, but I didn't know how to stop. It spiraled out of control. Her voice cracked as she added, but that's not the whole story. I frowned, my chest tightening. What are you talking about? Landon didn't just show up at the hospital to check on you. She admitted. He showed up because he's angry. Because I ended things with him. And because he knows about the money. What money? I demanded, my patience wearing thin. She looked down, guilt written all over her face. While you were in Tokyo, I borrowed money from him. A lot of money. I told him it was for the house, for bills. But the truth is I was using it to fund my lifestyle. The trips, the shopping, everything. You still to here? Stunt. You borrowed money from the guy you were cheating on me with? Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And now he wants it back. He's been threatening me, threatening to come after you if I don't pay. The room spun as the full weight of her betrayal settled over me. She hadn't just cheated on me. She put me in danger. I'm done, Emily, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Do you hear me? I'm done. You've lied to me, stolen from me, and now you've dragged me into your mess. I don't care what Landon wants. I'm not cleaning up after you anymore. Jake, please, she begged, reaching for my hand. I made mistakes, huge mistakes, but I still love you. I want to fix this. You don't get to say that, I snapped, pulling my hand away. You don't love me, Emily. You love what I gave you. The house, the money, the security. But you don't get to pretend like any of this was about love. She burst into tears, but I didn't care. I was too angry, too hurt. You need to leave, I said firmly. Now. Jake, get out. I shouted, the monitor beside me beeping wildly as my heart rate spiked. The nurse rushed in, her expression alarmed. You need to calm down, Mr. Carter, she said, adjusting the 4. This kind of stress isn't good for you. Emily stood there for a moment, her face crumpling as the nurse ushered her out of the room. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of relief. She was gone, and I intended to keep it that way. Over the next few days, I focused on myself. The doctors adjusted my medication, the nurses kept me on a strict diet, and the physical therapist introduced light exercises to rebuild my strength. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again, or at least a version of myself I could tolerate. I called my lawyer and began the divorce process. There was no saving my marriage, and I wasn't about to let Emily drag me down any further. I also filed a restraining order against Landon, just in case his threats escalated. But the biggest decision I made was about my life. For years, I'd been chasing success, pushing myself to the brink in the name of ambition. I told myself I was doing it for Emily, for our future, but the truth was I was running from my own insecurities. I needed to prove I was worth something, that I could be someone. Now, I realized none of that mattered. What mattered was my health, my happiness, and rebuilding a life on my own terms. It's been 6 months since I left the hospital. The divorce was finalized last month, and I've officially left my job. I moved into a smaller house, just me and my dog, Max, and started freelancing. The pace is slower, the pay isn't as high, but for the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. As for Emily, I haven't spoken to her since the divorce. I heard through mutual friends that Landon tried to take her to court over the money, but I stayed far away from the drama. It's not my problem anymore. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that life is too short to waste on people who don't value you. I spent years sacrificing myself for a marriage that was already broken. And for what? To end up in a hospital bed, wondering if I'd even wake up? Never again. Now, every day feels like a second chance, and I'm not going to waste it.